Chapter 8 Universal Synchronicity. Having pulled into the parking lot of the coffee shop to which Lindsay had directed him, Jason shut his car's engine and turned on his phone, which had been off since he left the dinner earlier that night. Before he had shut his car door, and after stepping out to follow Lindsay to the door of the establishment, his phone rang with the chime that specified an incoming call from Carl. Lindsay opened the door and held it as Jason looked at his ringing phone. She started closing the door and he shook his head. "Go ahead in. I will be under a minute." She shook her head and closed the door. "Go ahead if you'll be under a minute." He answered the call and started counting in his head. "Carl," he said, "what's up?" Painfully aware that they were standing just between the doorway and the outside tables, he reached for her arm to pull her away from the tables to the other side of the doorway, and was startled how easy he made the motion. "Where are you?" Carl's voice denoted that he was walking. "I'm at—" Jason looked at the name above the door. "Kick Butt Coffee?" he asked Lindsay, and she smiled and nodded. "On Airport?" Carl's voice through the phone was loud enough to compel Jason to move the phone further from his ear and adjust the volume while Carl continued speaking something that Jason could not make clear. When he put the phone back to his ear, Jason heard Carl saying, "And she is starting to doubt her choice, and I need you to talk to her because I know you could tell her in a way that she would accept and understand." "Carl," Jason interrupted, "this isn't a good time." "Why? What? Do you have a date or something?" Jason looked at Lindsay and felt a second slip away. "You've got a date?" Carl had clearly stopped walking when the realization struck him. "Not really," Jason tried to explain, and his friend picked up on it. "You picked up a girl, didn't you? You dog! You go with it. And in most times I would leave you be, but tonight Tabitha needs your help." What happened to her? Jason realized he had missed something important when adjusting the volume on his phone, but could now hear the useless information of Carl starting his car. "I will tell you when I get there. Just stay put and talk with your new lady friend." And Jason, "It is a lady, right?" "Yeah," Jason said, somewhere between being insulted and giggling. "I never can tell with you kids, given what with Danny and all. Have you seen or spoken with her since dinner?" Jason started as Lindsay opened the door. "Never mind, go. I will see you there." And Carl ended the call as Jason walked to the door. "That was a little more than a minute," Lindsay chided. "I'm sorry," Jason said as he neared. "Carl gets to talking and—" "Did you just name drop on me?" Lindsay asked as Jason walked through the door. He stepped aside once within the shop, and she walked by. "No, it really was Carl." "Uh-huh," she said with mock disbelief to goad him on. "Really? Do you want to see my phone?" He held it out to her. "How do I know you didn't have some friend of yours call right then?" He realized she was joking around with him and felt silly. "Oh, yeah." His tone became sardonic. "I planned this out months in advance, stalking you to learn your movements, and then I canceled the buses because I have that kind of power." She looked at him with a laugh just beneath the surface of her cheeks. "In for a penny, in for a pound," he thought. "I also used mind control to keep Dylan's revenge from learning any new material, and keeping the band members from learning your name," she giggled. "In fact, this entire night is just a book I'm writing." "You write it. I'll edit it," she said, and turned towards the counter, quickly repeating her last two words. "Edit it, edit it, edit it." She leaned on the counter, and the barista smiled. So, what's good here? Jason asked. First time here? The bartender asked. No, Lindsay said. He has amnesia, and I am his caseworker. She turned to Jason. Do you want your regular? Jason nodded slowly, and Lindsay mimicked the movement. Good, she said, touching his arm. Muy bien, she added with a nearly patronizing tone of voice before turning to the counter. 2 dirty chai lattes, kick butt size. And the barista tapped on the screen of the cash register. 2 24-ounce dirty chai lattes, for here or to go? For here, she replied. Actually, can we get them to go but still stay here? Jason asked her. You could do that if you'd like, Chief, the barista replied, without realizing he wasn't the one the question was directed toward. Why? Lindsay asked. Because the to-go cups can stay. It's just the to-stay cups can't go, the barista replied, looking up from the screen and realizing his faux pas. Sorry, he quickly interjected, and the kitchen staff member behind him, who had watched this, laughed. Because Carl is coming here to tell me something about our friend, who he says needs my help. Jason let the words spill out of him. Nodding and wondering if Jason was being honest or not, Lindsay said, to go, and the barista tapped the screen appropriately. That'll be $10.50, he said. Jason reached for his wallet, and Lindsay stopped him. I got it. Are you sure? Jason asked, more as a reaction than a question. Yeah, she said, reaching into her purse. You are my ride. I might meet your friend, and I would have spent 3 times this on my first 2 drinks if I had stayed at the show. She handed a credit card to the barista, who swiped it and waited for the receipt to print. Well, thank you, Jason said cordially. I will make it up to you at some point. I'll tell you what. If Carl doesn't show up here, you can pay me back in cash tonight, she said with a smile and her tongue protruding through her teeth. The barista handed her the receipt, and Jason noticed that she wrote in a tip of $2.50 to round out the purchase to $15. He calculated quickly what percentage that would be when she handed the receipt back across the counter. Thank you, the barista said honestly. No problem, Lindsay replied as she led Jason to the area where they would stand to wait for their drinks. The barista began constructing the beverages, and she waited until the sound of steam infusing into chai and milk would cover her voice. I was a waitress for 2 summers. Anyone who is relying on tips should be tipped well. It makes the world better in many ways other than the finances of the tippee. How so? He asked. Let's just say it adds a little brightness to that person's life for that moment. They are interacting with a myriad of people through their shift, and any good feeling they get is given off to all the folks who they come in contact with. A good deed like that to a server helps them out, but it also helps all the people they come in contact with, and all the people they come in contact with, and so on and so forth. The flavored milk reached its saturation point of steam, and the shots of espresso were pulling in very close to the optimal 28 seconds. The tall cups sat waiting, and Jason watched them gulp down the espresso into their vacant bellies. The steamed flavored milk ran atop, like tasty clouds, until the brim of each cup was reached. Capped and lifted with zarf rings, the dirty chai lattes were placed within arm's reach of the 2 before they could conjure further conversation. Thanking the barista, they took the cups and sat at one of the tables near the center of the room. The shop was less than 2/3 empty, but the conversations of the patrons were lively, and Jason felt comfortable to speak without fear of being overheard by anyone other than Lindsay. And, of course, the reader. He refused to start the conversation from that point, however, as he did not want to give more thought to it at that moment, but rather wanted to enjoy the fleeting moment of sitting across a tiny table from a very pretty girl in a martial arts themed coffee shop. He wanted to savor the feeling in that moment, the absolute splendor of seeing no detrimental aspect of any of the constituent components of that moment. When the newness of a situation obscures all possible imperfections and idealism can be upheld without rigorous effort and copious amounts of energy. These thoughts ran through his brain at speeds greater than could be measured, and each resonated emotions that coursed through his entire self in the brief time it took for him to lift the cup to his lips and take a tiny sip of the tasty hot brew. He lightly licked his lip after the sip. "Oh my God," he said, "this is fantastic." "Right?" Lindsay agreed. "Best flavors combined that I ever did find in this town or any others." Jason was awestruck for a second and then smiled. "That was poetic." "I speak masterfully," she replied, "so try to keep up." She was chiding him, and her smile and eyebrows told him so. She sipped her drink while looking at him. He could have stared at her silently, just observing her movements and enjoying the view. Yet there had to be something for him to say or do. This or any other towns, was that poetry for its own sake? Or have you traveled around a lot? "Asking a lady if she's been around, are you? Not very becoming of a gentleman," she joked, and quickly reverted to her part in the conversational back and forth. "Mostly poetry. I've traveled, but not much outside of Texas. Yet." "Where are you from?" he asked. "Here," she said as she placed her cup on the table. Her talking became quicker. She spoke and her hands moved in a free-formed syncopation with the odd rhythms of her speech. "Well, not right here in this coffee shop, but here in Austin. I'm native, but my family moved just south to San Marcos when I was young. Then we moved north to Pflugerville, and then they got divorced, and my mom moved up to near Denton, where I lived for a while. And I visited a lot with my dad, and then got accepted to UT and moved to Austin, and I'm 3 years through my undergrad and considering grad school for speech therapy for children. And I know it doesn't seem like a lot, but so far, so good." She picked up her cup and moved to take another sip. "And how about you?" "Not here," he said, and his eyelids dropped slightly. He smiled as he inhaled through his nose. He placed his cup on the table and spoke in a manner very similar to how she spoke, including the hand gestures that near mirrored hers. "I'm one of many out-of-state transplants to Austin. I'm from Michigan originally, but moved here with my family more than 10 years ago. My brother moved back north for school, and I have my associates in accounting from ACC. I work on the back end of a home security company and make enough to cover my meager expenses as I try to cultivate words in new and unique ways to explain how the human experience engages and excites me through all my days." He picked up his cup and sipped. "Is that good?" She looked at him with her head slightly turned and squinted above her smile. "Were you mocking me?" "No, just mirroring," he told her with giddiness in his voice. "Even down to the syllable count." He sipped his latte and waited for that to sink in. "I don't know if you're serious or not, and if you are serious, if it is accurate or not," she said, her tone playful yet cautious. "I am serious," he began, "and it is accurate. 126 syllables in each." He could see the skepticism on her brow. "Really, I don't have an eidetic memory, But the way I experience spoken words, it's like seeing them sprawled on a page, but one on top of another. So I developed ways of making sense of the jumble. One of those ways is an ongoing syllable count. There was a pause, the kind between gunfighters in spaghetti westerns. Mustachioed, rimbawed, declarative, Fort Knox undulating disparagingly on fricative uvula motions. 30, he said. She shrugged. I wasn't keeping count, so it might be the case. But who knows what it was? I know, he said. So you say. She left her cup on the table and dug into her purse. But I want to test this. She extracted a small journal and a pen. She quickly opened the book and started writing on a page at such an angle that he could not see. So give me just a minute here, and let me concoct some outlandish string of words and see if you are joking and are a jerk, or are serious and a freak. Neither option seems like it is something I want to be, Jason pleaded. Oh, honey, Lindsay said kindly, freak is good. Mozart was a freak. So were Tesla and Einstein. She continued writing as she was looking at him. She glanced down to the page. Okay. She looked up to him. Ready? He waved his hand at his wrist. Go ahead. Time combination for true and oxidant cedar conflagrate is the and for ash opulent insight carnivorous leisure at open fractal taxonomy tirade sank red aspires club. 49, he said when she looked from the page to him. She started counting the syllables by touching the pen to each word on the page and quietly whispering the numbers. When she got to the end, she stopped, and he saw her disbelief release. She looked up from the page. 49, she confirmed, and he smiled as he lifted his cup. Amazing. Yeah, maybe, he admitted, but that and $3 buys me a gallon of gas, and sometimes not even a full gallon. And he took a sip, feeling happy to have the wonderful flavor coupled with the look he interpreted as admiration for him from Lindsay. The feeling did not feel fleeting either. It was not fettered with the notion of it being temporary. He pondered his feelings from the past and wondered how many of them were facsimiles of feelings, enactments of his reflections upon others' emotions. That much of his world, his state of being, up until this moment, was largely experienced mentally, was not an idea he welcomed gracefully, but neither was it one he was willing to easily dismiss. If indeed his life had been lived removed from reality as it occurred, and his very existence was only experienced through his mind's reaction to his life, then that would explain a good deal about his augmented mental skills and near savant abilities regarding words. It would also mean, however, that he was only now seeing the shell he had encased himself within, and the thought that he had so willingly stayed cloistered away from engaging with reality embarrassed him. But why should he be embarrassed? He was a talented man, at least somewhat attractive, and with friends who were very dear to him. He thought, oh, how he thought of Danny and Tabitha, those two angels lightly pulling him from his armor over months of knowing him. And he thought of Carl, the kind of sibling he had always wanted, but could not have, being the eldest of his parents' children. He recalled that Carl was on his way to this shop, and that Tabitha was in some sort of trouble, and his goal now was to pass the time in the most enjoyable manner, as though these were the closing days of his sabbatical, and the mission ahead would be more than he had ever previously believed he could handle. "What's in that beautiful mind?" Lindsay asked, like a beacon that beckoned him from his now opened shell. He hesitated, as though looking at the collapsed walls that had held him in place for so long, feeling relief for standing unguarded now. "I have never picked up anyone like I did with you before." She gave a look of modest disbelief. "No, really. I just had a most incredible night with dear friends, and something changed in me because of it." He put his cup down and leaned on the table lightly. "Do you remember me telling you about the idea of the reader? The hyper being of some sort reading our thoughts and words and actions to know us in a way that no one else truly ever knows us to be?" she said simply with startling clarity as she placed her journal and pen on the table. "Yes." "Well, it took me a little time tonight to ponder the significance of that something. Some reader could be very well aware of every aspect of my being, including those aspects I would shield from the attention of others behind veils of silence or artistry. Poetry and literature are fantastic masks for all those sordid impulses that I had and wanted to deny in the eyes of others." Lindsay leaned back in her chair. He continued, "The most namely being my sexual desires. Any drive of a sexual nature, any sexual impulse at all, really. I would stall the expression so as to curtail my libido, and I thought as long as I only thought about it, then I was doing good. But something about the reader, the way we talked about the idea in a manner that was not religious or otherworldly, something about that conversation scared me into thinking that only thinking about sex was not enough. And since I could not stop the desires because I am human, I figured I should just trust myself to be a kind, sweet, and good man in acting those drives out." "And that's when you stopped at the bus stop," she said. "And that's when I met you," he confirmed. "Now, this might seem ridiculous to you, thinking back on something that, in the grand scheme of things, only just happened. But since talking with you, I feel a sense of liberation from my self-made chains. That life fulfillment need not be deep, but that the surface discussion can be as enthralling as any great novel, masterpiece of a film, or magnum opus of music." He furrowed his brow and looked down. "In fact, it could be said that the reason those forms of art were created at all is because the satisfying art of discussion was unavailable to the artists who created them." He looked back up to meet her wonder-filled gaze. "But that is something else, a discussion for another time perhaps. My point is, I am enjoying myself with you more so than I have enjoyed myself with anyone else. And as great as that sounds to me, the only reason why it is because I enjoy you more than I enjoy anyone else." He looked beyond her to the front window and could see Carl's car pull into a spot and eject the comedian of his own volition from the driver's side. "And because of that, I want to spend time with you, and would love for you to give me your number or take my number or email or address or all of it, because the friends of mine who spurred this awakening in me seem to be having some similar experiences, and I need to go and help." He looked up from her as Carl entered the shop. "Hey, Carl." As Carl moved closer, Lindsay kept her focus on Jason as she leaned forward and cupped his left hand on the table with both of hers. Jason looked from Carl to Lindsay. "I want to go with you now," she said, and his smile ruptured the volcanoes on planets that orbited distant stars. "That's great," Carl entered the discussion, "as long as we go. Lindsay finally looked up at Carl. Nice to meet you, he said. I'm Carl Nellisser. She cut him off. Yes, I know. You are a very funny comedian and a super popular local personality. I'm Lindsay, and I'm riding with Jason. Then let's saddle up, he said, and started walking towards the door. Hey, he addressed Jason. Have you heard from Danny tonight? Not since dinner, Jason replied as they walked out of the shop. But I will text her at the first red light.